were to truncate it in the manner that's been suggested. Thank you.
The Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Mr Speaker, in the trustworthy stakes, politicians battle for credibility and acknowledgement by the public who too often don't trust what we do or how we do it. I am the last person, probably that minister in particular, I'm the last person who my colleagues would back this up, who advocates for process. That's true. There you are. But I have to say, but I have to say, Mr Speaker, that is all we have here in this Parliament to ensure fairness, openness, to protect us from corruption, to protect us from undue influence. And I have to say that I was very concerned when the Minister started to explain why this is a truncated process for what is, as my colleagues say, one of the most important pieces of legislation this economy has seen for some time. And if there was ever a suspicion of what is happening in this legislation, then the fact that this process has been truncated, shortened, will add suspicion to the minds of the growing number of farmers out there who are wondering what this bill will do. In fact, one of the issues that we have raised, of course, is that a lot of the detail is unclear. This is enabling legislation. So it lays on the table, when passed, an ability for a cooperative, for Fonterra, the biggest company, to proceed with a process, basically beyond the control of Parliament. The entity was set up by virtue of legislation because of the issues raised by my colleagues in the previous debate. It is very important that when we deal with this entity, when we deal with the legislation around it, we do this in a proper way. Now, it is outrageous that Fonterra should be able to say to the Minister, and he says to the House, oh, we've got to rush this through because we've got to meet this deadline, as though there was some constitutional dilemma. Well, there isn't. In fact, there's still a question over whether anything will proceed from the legislation, if indeed it is enabling, as we are told. Well, the Select Committee has a huge task to analyse the bill, to see whether it is enabling or whether it in fact is a bullying piece of legislation, threatening, and the Chair of the Select Committee acknowledges that. I know we are the most efficient Select Committee in the House, Mr Speaker. I know that. In fact, we don't have too many political debates. But I have to say we are going to grapple with this piece of legislation given the unknowns around it. And to come into this House and say that after there has been much debate about which Select Committee it goes to, and we know that for a fact, after that has occurred, then finally the decision, because of some argy-bargy within the National Party, says, oh, we better put it to primary production, then to insult the committee and say that we aren't allowed to have the time to consider this properly. That's the committee, and we work here. What about the submitters? What about the 10,500 shareholders of this company that wants to make major constitutional change through the enabling legislation that the Select Committee will hear? Well, we're told that you've got to do that in a shorter time frame. Well, why? In fact, June the 1st just happens to coincide with the start of the new dairy season. In fact, if you're down in the Good Island, the South Island, in fact, most will be milking until the end of May. So the farmers aren't going to be able to physically get to Parliament to submit. Now, a suggestion of my colleague is that we should hop on a bus or hop on a plane and go around the country. That may, in fact, be the best thing to do. But I'd suggest, Mr Speaker, those with suspicious minds will say, in fact, this is being rushed through in the hope that very few farmers are able to make submissions. The objective is actually to reduce the opportunity to have input into the bill, because the ability to debate it in the lead-up to Parliament has been very limited. The constant criticism has been there has not been detail on the table for farmers to consider. In fact, the Shareholders' Council, arguably the most important body to make submissions on this bill, they have said they cannot support the bill in its current form. So I'm guessing they will have a substantive submission, and we're going to have to chew that over. And we're told now that we have to do it in a shorter time frame. Well, I hope that all the farmers, all the dairy industry people observing out there, not the investment community, the dairy farmers, I hope they are aware now of what is happening in Parliament through a sweetheart deal between the national government and Fonterra Board. Because that's the only way and the only reason that it's been rushed through. Fonterra have said they need to have this rushed through, and the National Party and government have said, fine by us. What do the farmers say? What do the growing number of concerned New Zealanders say? Those people who understand, support the cooperative, support the current structure, and are very, very wary of what is being proposed in this bill. Because they look offshore, and I'm sure legislation, be it in Ireland, be it in Denmark, be it in Holland, where we've had demutualisation of cooperatives in the dairy industry, those people probably, I hope, had a reasonable time to submit. But even there, with careful consideration, although I'm not aware of what they were intending, farmers, shareholders in that company have lost control of their entity. Now, we have wonderful words from the Minister and other people in the National Party there that they want to keep things intact. Well, it's going to be a tricky process to get the right wording in the legislation, because it will come down to openly traded or close trading of shares, untradable or tradable, 2 letters. All of those details, and we know the devil is in the detail, all of those will be assessed by the committee. Here's another question I have. Who will the Select Committee decide to be advisors on this? I'm guessing it's going to take us a wee while to decide that, and then to contact the people with appropriate skills to come and provide us with objective, unbiased advice. And can I flag here and now, Mr. Speaker, that I'm going to be very wary of anyone from MAF coming in, given the advice I've read from them, and I say that with sadness.
They're about the worst drafters. They're about the worst drafters in the public.
The worst. I take that advice with sadness, that they are the worst drafters. And now that they've got fisheries in there, I'd have to say, if you look at the history of the fisheries legislation, it's just got a hell of a lot worse.
Order, order.
So bringing it back, Mr. Speaker, we are going to have to double, triple check every single word in this legislation, because if we leave the door open for demutualisation, for inappropriate investment, for inappropriate pressure, then we will lose control of the dairy industry. And this is what the bill is about here. So I have concerns in a whole lot of areas, and the fact that this is being pushed and rushed through by the Board of Fonterra and by the National Party government is alarming. And I hope every dairy farmer up and down this country that's voted for the National Party gets that message very clearly. And I hope they go and knock on the door, because there'll be a short time frame, but time enough to between milkings, to get in their car and to go into town and hammer on the door of the national government and the National Party politician. Because that is why it is, yes, it's a very narrow door, I know. In fact, they go through it sideways with one eye on. Mr. Banks, they'll find your door as well, because the process of the Select Committee is going to be so short. The opportunity for all of those people to make submissions has been shortened, so you'll probably have a rush in a few weeks of people banging on the door, coming in with their gumboots, which is what they should do. Mr. Speaker, in summary, Mr. Speaker, this shortened, truncated process...
Sorry to interrupt the honourable member. His time has expired.
Mr. Speaker.
I call the Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to acknowledge